All right, let's dive into one of the boldest, most audacious moments in India's entire struggle for independence. This is a story about pure defiance, about revolution, and about a train heist that became an absolute legend. We're talking about the Kakori train action.
But here's the real question, the one that sits at the heart of this whole story. How on earth does an act that the British government dismissed as simple banditry, Dakoti they called it, become this powerful, enduring symbol for a nation's fight for freedom?
Well, let's figure that out. To really get the Kakori action, you first have to understand the anger behind it. This thing didn't just happen out of nowhere. No, it was the boiling point, after years of oppression, and it was driven by this new, fiery generation of revolutionaries who were absolutely determined to make a statement.
So the seeds for this were really sown in pure outrage. Back in 1919, the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre sent shockwaves across the nation. It lit a fire, creating this desire for a much more radical path to freedom. And just 5 years later, that desire got organized. The Hindustan Republican Association, the HRA, was born. This was a group of people who were completely convinced that freedom wasn't going to be handed to them. It had to be taken.
Okay, so why a train? Why not something else? Well, this was no random choice. It was actually a brilliant, calculated move. First off, the HARA was broke. They desperately needed cash for weapons and to fund their operations. Second, it was a direct shot at the British government, stealing their own money right from under their noses. Third, they hoped an act this bold would wake people up and inspire them to join the cause. And last but not least, they knew about a key weakness. The trains carrying government money were surprisingly not that well guarded. So, who was the crew behind this incredible plan? They were the absolute core of the HRA, and their names were about to be etched into the history of India's freedom struggle forever. You had Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, the legendary Chandrasekhar Azad, and 7 other key members. It was a team of 10, all in and ready to risk everything. The planning was done, the team was ready, the stage was set. Now, it was time for the action itself. On a moving train near a tiny village called Kakori. So picture this. It's the night of August 9th, 1925. 10 revolutionaries, just blending in with the other passengers, are on board the train. As it gets close to Kakori, someone pulls the emergency chain. The train screeches to a dead stop. In all that chaos, they spring into action. They quickly overpower the guards, their eyes on one thing and one thing only: an iron safe in the guards' van packed with government cash.
And what was inside that safe? 8,000 rupees. Now, I know what you're thinking. That might not sound like a huge amount of money today, but you have to remember this is 1925. That was an absolute fortune. It was more than enough money to buy the weapons they needed, to print the pamphlets they wanted, and to fuel the next phase of the revolution. This was a major win. And right in the middle of all this action, the revolutionaries made one point crystal clear. Their fight was with the British government, not with the Indian people. No passengers were touched, none were robbed. This was designed to be a political action, a very targeted strike against the colonial state, not just some random crime. But you can't poke an empire like that and not expect a reaction. This act of defiance would not go unanswered. The British Empire, totally stunned and, frankly embarrassed, launched one of the biggest manhunts in its history. The revolutionaries had sent their message, and now the empire was about to send one back. The price for their bravery was going to be incredibly steep. After a massive investigation, most of the revolutionaries were caught. The trial that followed, known as the Kakori Conspiracy case, handed down absolutely brutal sentences. 4 men paid the ultimate price for their defiance: Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, Rajendranath Lahiri, and Thakur Roshan Singh. They were all executed in December of 1927. And the crackdown didn't stop there. It was sweeping. Others were sentenced to life in prison, sent to the infamous cellular jail. The man who actually pulled the emergency chain, Manmath Gupta, he got a 14-year sentence. The British cast this huge net. They were determined to completely crush the HRA for good.
But one of the key planners, the guy in charge of security during the heist, he just vanished. Chandrasekhar Azad slipped right through their fingers. He escaped, and he would stay a thorn in the side of the British for years to come, continuing the fight right up until his very last breath.
So the British may have won in the courtroom, but they were starting to lose the much bigger battle for hearts and minds. Because the harsh punishments, they didn't crush the revolutionary spirit at all. Actually, they did the opposite. They turned these men from supposed criminals into martyrs, and the heist itself into this legendary act of sacrifice.
And right here, this is the whole story in a nutshell. You have these two completely different narratives. On one hand, the British government officially labeled it the Kakori Decodi, trying to frame it as just a simple robbery. But the Indian public, they saw something completely different. They saw young men who were willing to die for their country. They didn't see bandits, they saw heroes. And they called it a sacrifice for freedom. And that's how it's remembered today.
Which really brings us to a final, pretty powerful thought. The story of Kakori really forces you to ask, where exactly is the line between a criminal and a revolutionary? It kind of seems like the answer really just depends on who's telling the story, and in the end, on who wins the war.